Welcome to AI Agile Meetup's first talk, Future Imperfect, the sad tale of how artificial intelligence and robotics can bring about the end of capitalism. Today's speaker, Mike Levings, is a seasoned Agile coach and Scrum Master, has helped many teams and organizations adopt best practices for over 25 years in both the public and private sectors. Before becoming an Agile coach, he worked as a lead developer on various projects, both in the UK and internationally. With a real passion for both AI and robotics, I welcome Mike to talk to us about the future imperfect. If you're interested in more talks like this, visit www.aiagile.org. We'd love for you to become part of this community. Without any further ado, let's welcome Mike.
Slideshow. So before I share the slideshow, let me just ask if there are any questions during my presentation. Please stop me, ask questions. We only learn through engagement, so I'm an advocate for that. So let me see if I can find a presentation. Hopefully you guys will be able to see that. Let's go back to slide number 1, shall we? Hold on a second. Rightio. So I'm hoping you guys can all see Future Imperfect.
Yep.
And I think I just want to start off by contextualizing what I'm trying to achieve before I continue with the presentation here. So I wanted to do a presentation on the sociological impact from a futurist point of view of AI and robotics. So many people that are here because they're into AI, agile, they're into futurism, they're techies like me, which is great. I don't feel so alone. But I'm also very interested in seeing the human impact that some of this may have. My aim here to do this presentation is to show you a point of view, but it's not to try and convince you guys of anything. It is to try and convince, if anything, you to have a conversation about this. And I'm a strong believer in cultivating good conversation. And the more that we can talk about things, the more likely we have to get a decent outcome at the end of the day. So Future Imperfect, the sad tale of how artificial intelligence and robotics can bring around the end of capitalism and the need for money. So I was speaking with my nephew about this, and he said it's a dystopian descent into a utopian future. So kudos to him for introducing that subtitle. So let's have a look. Right. So I'd like to start off by imagining the end of our journey. So imagine a utopia where literally there is no need to work anymore. Everything that you need can be done for free. You can be happily sitting outside. You want some food. You just ask your robots to go and make you some food, and they will go and make it for you. They'll go and do the groceries, etc., etc. You want a new house on top of the hill. You just tell somebody you want a house on top of the hill, and given enough time, hopefully you will have a house built for you. So there'll be no need for money. There's no poverty, no starvation, no need to work. You can just fill your life with whatever you enjoy. So a very utopian view. Take you on that journey. So I believe that there are 5 crucial elements that'll be needed in order for us to reach this utopia. Element number 1 will be AGI, ASI. So for those who maybe do not know, AGI is artificial general intelligence. And I'll define AGI as having artificial intelligence that is roughly equivalent to human intelligence. It might not be exactly the same because it might work a little different, but the outcomes I think will be much the same. It'll be able to achieve the same thing. I'll then define ASI as just being better than AGI. The idea is that we reach a level of artificial intelligence that can basically do and think through the problem domain in much the same way that we can. Next element will be dexterous robots. So there's been an absolute explosion recently, not just in the AI field, but in robotics as well. I'm sure all of you have seen some of the fantastic YouTube videos and new products that have been released recently. However, a lot of those robots are still not as dexterous as humans. I was having a very interesting conversation about this a while ago with somebody, and they were saying, robots are used in the production environment, in manufacturing, in cars, for example. But humans are still used because, for example, when you put a dashboard in, you still need somebody who's dexterous enough to put their hand through little gaps in the dashboard to be able to fix things where robots really can't get to. So in order to get to this future, we're going to need robots that are roughly as dexterous as we are. The next thing would be sustainable energy. Obviously, we need to power these guys as much as we can. And we need to do that in a way that doesn't absolutely obliterate the planet in the process. So really, it's not just energy, but I think sustainable energy is key to that. There's so much going on in renewables at the moment. Hopefully, we'll get there for that as well. Sustainable materials. So again, we don't want to pillage the planet in our need to go and create all of the stuff. And then I think the last point is the will to believe. And to me, that's a critical component because there needs to be a concerted effort to bring all of this together. We're seeing such amazing progress in AI, robotics, etc. at the moment. But I think what you'll find as well is there's a lot of people putting regulatory barriers in the way. Those we could argue are necessary to protect ourselves. But we need to be able to utilize them intelligently so that they don't stifle our ability to get to this utopia that I'm sort of seeing. And if you bring those 5 elements together, hopefully we get synthetic humans. The synthetic humans would be able to do much of what we can do currently. They can think through the same problems and come up with similar solutions. I'm not going to get into debates, although we can do if you want to later on, about what we call the alignment problem, which is trying to get those synthetic humans to do what, to have outcomes that replicate our own outcomes so that they're not working against us, but rather working with us. The point I'm really keen on making here is once we've got all of those 5 components, we should be able to create these synthetic humans, which hopefully can create more of themselves. They can do all the work that we need to do, and they will hopefully produce and help us produce all of the outcomes that we need. So there's an interesting concept that a term that I ran into a little while ago, post-labor economics. So this is something I heard from Dave Shapiro, but subsequently have heard from a lot of other people. And the idea is that if you're going to have all of these robots, of course, they're going to start taking away a lot of our jobs. And he talks about the ability to liberate human potential from the requirements of employment. I'll simplify that because I've just got a simple brain. I just say, you can do what you want when you want without any worries. Right here, moving on. So if we get to a place where all of these robots can do everything for us, I argue we can get to a zero cost economy. So if we can have synthetic humans that can produce everything we need, we can produce all that free energy, and everybody comes together, we should be able to create almost infinite supply. Prices will decrease to 0 or near 0 across the board for anything that we need. We need that to happen pretty much globally. And then anything else that isn't 0 cost, for example, land cost, hopefully there will be a push at that point, because we'll be so close to this utopian vision. There'll be a push at that point sociologically, from a government's point of view, to actually absorb everything else that possibly is privately owned or does have a cost associated with it into public ownership. And that will mean that we'll therefore have truly 0 cost across the board. All righty. Again, if there's any questions, anybody, please stop me. I'm not an AI guru or a robotics guru or an economist, so this is all a little bit out of my comfort zone, so hopefully it all makes sense.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, can't turn my video on because it'll just crash the tab. So this is what the dream is, and what this theory, zero cost economy theory
Yeah.
is implying, is that all effort all effort expended by humanoids to create resources, to do the jobs, the difficult jobs, to support our existence, have zero cost, because there's no requirement for humans to actually what's the word I'm looking for? Requirements for humans to pay for any additional resources in order to keep the wheels going, because the bots will do that, or the humanoids will do that, sorry.
That's almost spot on. So the way that I sort of envision this is, you know, I can speak to my robot and I can say, can you go and make me some dinner? And hopefully they can, but they can also go and do grocery shopping. At the moment, they'd have to pay for those because we've got to buy groceries. But imagine if the the grocery store has robots that can go and farm for them and produce those groceries for free. Then along this chain of supply, there's less and less need for markup and profit. And so hopefully that reduces cost until eventually it becomes so ubiquitous that there becomes almost no need for additional cost. And so you can have this idea that things can become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until they become either zero cost for certain things or near zero cost. Another example might be building a house. So if you want to build a house at the moment, you've got to pay for labor and goods as well as the land, obviously. But if the land can be done by robots that you already have, well, then labor cost goes down to zero. There's still a cost for land, but hopefully land can be absorbed eventually. And the cost of the goods, well, hopefully they can go, and if you're going to make everything out of timber, to simplify my example, then they can go and cut down the trees and make lumber and create that house for you. And so there are mechanisms by which you can certainly drive down cost and hopefully get to almost zero cost. To expand on that just a little bit, there's some good books that are written about this, and I'll refer to those in a second, where they actually talk about how you can become a zero cost economy. Does that answer your question, hopefully?
Sure did. I do think that the 0.01% is going to have a problem with this.
Oh, absolutely.
Challenge.
I'll certainly get onto that point as well.
There is a question by Eric. Eric, if you want to.
Please go ahead, Eric.
I can wait to the end if you're not finished. It's kind of a summary thought based on what I've heard thus far, but definitely appreciate the presentation. So continue.
Okay, cool. All right. Righty. So moving on. So per what I've just said, there's some fantastic books by a guy by the name of Jeremy Rifkin, who has done some work on this. I'll talk about him a little bit more at the end. Two fantastic books there. So Zero Marginal Cost Society, it was his work pre-AI. He was talking about Internet of Things, I think, and how that could potentially lead to almost a zero cost economy. End of Work was exactly the same sort of thing. Two books, and again, guys, I'll hand out these slides, so you'll be able to look up this. He explains all of this far better than I do. I'm just almost saying at the moment, maybe I can't explain it very well, not being an economist, but let's hope we can get to a zero cost economy, because it'll be needed in order to reach this utopia. I'm cheating a bit, I got to admit. All right, so hopefully, given all of that, we get to this utopian vision of the future, where everything we need to do will be free. No need for money, capitalism, no starvation, everything's perfect. You go outside and the weather is perfect every day, which would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Unfortunately, how does that help us? Because we are where we are at the moment and we don't have a zero cost economy. So next, I want to take you on a bit of a journey from where we are now to this utopian vision. So we still need money, and yes, we do. I'm just going to skip ahead a little here. The problem with the journey is we have all of these AI systems we have now with chatbots, and we've got robots that potentially have the ability to replace human beings. Um, and let's face it, the greed of capitalists. Let's not take any and all opportunity to vilify the capitalists out there. Um, but with all of that, what we potentially have in the world right now, if we look forward a little bit, is a worry that many people have, which is that there'll be an ever diminishing job market. So AI will certainly have a huge impact, I think, in knowledge work, which is what I do as an agile coach. Robotics will have a marked effect in blue collar work. Um, and those people who own companies want to reduce their costs. So if they can do that, employing any of these technological resources at their disposal, they may well do that, and that could impact the job market. Governments will try and get involved and protect people. They do that at the moment to a greater or lesser degree, but there will be, as we get an increase in unemployment, there will be more protectionist views out there from governments. We're already seeing that. The EU have already introduced an act to manage how AI works. America has a template that they're debating at the moment. I think it's called RAIA, RAIA, which is looking at how they can ensure that AI doesn't have deleterious effects sociologically, security, etc., etc. But the more that people start losing jobs and the more that affects people and the people that vote, the more politicians are going to want to get involved and try and be protectionist. However, I think we might be at the beginning of a snowball effect where AI and robotics is almost inevitable now. The degree to which it will evolve, I guess, is still a question, but it's a snowball, and we're kind of there for the ride. So although they might try and slow it down, I think that's all that they can do. I think it'll become inevitable. And if it does become inevitable, then I'll state the obvious. No money is poverty. Poverty leads to starvation. Enormous amounts of starvation will lead to tension. Because there'll be unemployment, you potentially have diminished taxes unless the tax regime is changed and we start looking at other alternatives like universal basic income or universal basic services, etc. I'm not going to get into that too much, but it is a downward trend. And imagine, we could reach a tipping point where unemployment is so high that they're not going to get taxes to be able to protect people. And that could make things really bad. Imagine a world with 80% unemployment. And that could be a really scary place. Could be, maybe. Go even further down that rabbit hole. So bad as things could get, eventually you'll have an increase in suffering. You'll have an increase of those that are the haves that will protect what they have. You'll have those that have family members and themselves that are starving and suffering, and they will protect them. And so you'll get an ever greater schism between the two. We've seen that historically in our history across multiple cultures already to a greater or lesser degree. What I do see is that governments that might initially start with trying to protect the voters will eventually start trying to protect people that have resources because they realize on which side of the bread their butter is. And that potentially could lead to mass war. And that's a very bleak point of view, so sorry for that. So what does this all mean? So I believe governments won't be able to stop the onslaught of AI and robotics. I believe governments won't be able to protect the people eventually, that they'll only be able to delay the inevitable, and all that they're going to be able to do is actually elongate the suffering. There's an alternative point of view, which is delay things until we can find solutions. But to be fair, guys, that's not congruent with what I'm trying to explain here, so we'll just ignore that possibility for the moment. It'll just take longer for us to get to that utopian view. Put another way, and this was because somebody said to me that didn't really explain it too well. So imagine the red line there is a minimum state that we need in order to reach those synthetic human beings that are going to do everything for us. The blue is our technological advancement in order to get there, time along the x-axis. So where we are now, less jobs, to no jobs, to poverty, to war. We'll start turning a corner where we'll start having some adoption, there'll be more freedoms, and then eventually utopia. So what can we do? And this brings me to really the crux of what I'm trying to portray. Even if we don't have solutions, let's start the conversation. Even if we're scared about this, let's start the conversation. Even if I'm wrong about everything I've just said, well, let's at least start the conversation. The best way to curb these things is to start talking about them. At the very least, we need to start the conversation. And actually, I should have said this right up front, but this whole talk was inspired by the idea that sociological and cultural change takes decades, and AI and robotics are advancing so quickly that if we don't start talking about this now, we might find ourselves engulfed by the consequences of that technological advancement without having time to really adjust sociologically in order to make better decisions for humanity. Now, just last quick thought, what happens if we flip this on its head? So maybe there's a better way. So maybe instead of delaying things, we should speed up things and incentivize improvements in AI adoption, right? Because if we can reduce the longevity of our suffering, then although we might still get a lot of intense suffering, hopefully we reduce the duration that we suffer. Put a slightly different way, if this is 10 generations that we're going to be sliding down this hill, I'd rather that we got to utopia within a generation, half a generation, 2 generations, as soon as possible. And that might be some very hard times ahead, but I'd still rather get there quicker. Because if we can, we'll reach utopia sooner for the betterment of future generations. Cool. So, thank you for your time and your attention. And sorry for putting a bleak mark on a perfectly good Friday. Just some additional things. I, after doing all of this, thought I'd better get some proof that actually I'm not talking absolute rubbish. So to add a little bit of confirmation bias, there's some fantastic resources as well. As I said, Mr. Rifkin has written some really good stuff on this. I mean, he's a well-respected author and futurist, 23 books in his career. He really has done some fantastic work. Nick Bostrom is also a professor at Oxford. So he's written about deep utopia, does a lot of very good podcasts, like Lex Friedman, for example, at the moment, who's again a well-respected podcaster at the moment. So I've given you some resources there for some of the stuff that he's looking at the moment in terms of utopia and superintelligence and the impact of the stuff. Anton Koronek, who I'd never heard of until I went and investigated this. Now, interestingly, he somewhat recently, I think it was 23, actually I've got the date there, we go, November 23, actually stood up in front of the US Senate AI Insight Forum and did a presentation about how to prepare the workforce for an uncertain AI future. There's a paper online which you can download, which I thought was, again, quite fascinating. Again, very well-respected scholar, and definitely any of his work is worth talking about. And then Yuval Harari, who, again, I think is a futurist, does some fantastic work, and his 2 books are certainly worth looking at as well. And that, I think, is that. So I open the floor up to Snehal and anybody else who wants to ask a question. Though I think if I remember correctly, Eric, you had your hand up.
Yes, definitely appreciate the presentation, as well as the caveat in the beginning that this is a thought exercise and for it to be something that sparks conversation, which I think I'm looking forward to others who have thoughts to share. But this is actually interesting because this week I've been thinking about the convergence of philosophy and technology. And this topic in particular is like letting me think about, how influential technology has been on society, but also on our perceptions of ourselves in society. And so I have three questions to put out there as we think about this topic that it's rhetorical. You don't have to answer it, but I think it's worth putting into the conversation. And the first question is, how does technology affect our understanding of ourselves and our place in the world? The second thought that I want to add to this conversation is what are the ethical implications of new technologies such as artificial intelligence and gene editing? And the third point I want to make is, how can we ensure that technology is used for good and not evil? And I think a lot of the things that you described and the different variations of what a future utopia could look like uh, cover some of these points. And I think it's definitely a conversation that we should have because we are the ones that are crafting these narratives and creating these scenarios. And so I definitely appreciate you having the courage to talk about it in this way. And I hope that we can continue to think thoughtfully about as we're building technology and being leaders in this space, how we're able to think about how philosophical scenarios, but also moral and just our perception of our own value as humans are in this equation.
Eric, I think that's a fantastic thing. Before I address that, I'm going to stop sharing at the moment because I wouldn't mind moving this back to a forum. The idea at the end of the day was for us to have a conversation. I don't have answers for you. I think right now I'm very curious on people asking the right questions. So Eric, I think those were absolutely fantastic questions. And I will say this, I have spent more time now probably speaking to philosophy students, given all of this, than I have technical people, because I'm asking exactly this. And even when you talk about good and bad, what is good and bad? I'm trying to understand where the delineation of all of that stuff is. So I think those are fantastic questions. And I welcome anybody else to give their thoughts on them if they want to.
I just want to say thank you so much for shining the light on this topic. I know you and I have had conversations, but I really think this is an important conversation. And just like Mike said, starting the conversation. And I think many of these things are actually happening, right? We're seeing parallels driven from what was discussed today. It might not be on mainstream media, but if you actually just unravel a little bit of it, like I know Mustafa Suleiman on his Coming Wave talks about this exact scenario, right? That turbulence period that we're in. In order for us to get to utopia, we have to. There will be this period, and I think many people are sparking the debate and having the conversation. But I think it's important for us to continue the conversation. And Mike, I thank you. I mean, I couldn't get enough. I wish this could go. The presentation and the slides could go on forever. But I really think this is an important topic, a different perspective indeed. And it may seem a little uncomfortable. I knew when I first talked about it, it was a little bit uncomfortable to talk about it, but I think it's definitely worth the conversation. And really just thinking about, because collectively, if we do this all together, I think we will be able to move through it. And I know for the last couple of years, I've been on this journey and I can see a lot of this stuff unfold. But definitely thank you again for at least sparking